and it's Christmas, and that's the best. All right, now you should know something about me, and that is that I hate waiting. Does anyone else hate waiting? Just a raise of hands, not your mouths, just your hands. Who else hates waiting? I hate it so much. If someone tells me that something is going to happen, I want it to happen immediately. I don't want to wait. I don't want it to happen tomorrow. I don't want it to happen 20 minutes from now. I want it to happen right now because, one, if it's exciting, I want to experience that excitement right then. I don't want to wait to experience the excitement. And if it's not so great, if it's something that like I'm nervous about or afraid about or just not excited to do, I also want that to happen right now because I don't want to put it off. I don't want to just like wait and be nervous until this maybe bad thing happens. I want it to happen right now. So I hate waiting because of the anticipation. It can just be kind of challenging. So last week we talked about how one of the things I love about the holiday season is that we get this chance to remember the Christmas story. And we get this chance to remember that Jesus was born. And so the churchy word for this season is called Advent. Maybe you've heard that before. And the word Advent comes from a Latin word that means coming. So we are waiting for the coming of Jesus. And so Advent is a season where we're preparing for the birth of Jesus, where we are waiting for the birth of Jesus. And we aren't the first people to experience Advent. And although Advent is still like a relatively newish term, like Advent didn't happen before Jesus, but for a long time, people waited for Jesus. So in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, which is written hundreds of years before Jesus was born, we learn that people are already talking about the birth of Jesus. So the first time we hear about the birth of Jesus isn't from Mary. It isn't from the angel. The first time we hear about the birth of Jesus is hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus was actually born. And they're talking about the coming of this Messiah. And there's a prophecy that talks about how Jesus will be born, who he will be born to, like the type of person, and how Jesus is going to treat people, and some of the names that Jesus will be called. And that was hundreds of years before Jesus even entered the world. So for hundreds of years, people are talking about and waiting for Jesus to be born because no one knew when it was going to happen. No one knew who was going to be the mom of this baby. So they just waited and waited. And we learn about two people in the New Testament, Simeon and Anna, who waited and waited for Jesus to be born. And there we can read about that in the New Testament, and we're going to talk specifically just briefly about Anna. And what it says in the Gospel of Luke is that Anna never left the temple. She was waiting for Jesus, and she worshiped, and she fasted, and she prayed. Coming up to them, the them is Jesus and his family. Coming to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child, Jesus, to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. So they'd been waiting. So it says in Scripture that Anna was 83 years old. So her whole life, she was waiting for Jesus to come. She was praying and going to church and worshiping because she knew that God promised that this baby was going to come to earth. Anna and Simeon were people who waited their whole lives with a hope that they would meet Jesus. And what I love about the stories of both of them is that as they waited, they continued to be faithful. They went to church, They talked about God. They continued to pray. Even though God wasn't answering this prayer for them, they continued to be hopeful. They continued to wait and believe that Jesus would come and that God would fulfill this promise. They didn't just stop and wait and do nothing. They didn't give up. They continued on with life in belief that this thing that God had promised would come true. And they never gave up that hope. I have trouble sitting and waiting 20 minutes in the doctor's office without having something else to do. Like, if I'm waiting, I had a doctor's appointment this week, and my doctor was 20 minutes late, and I went up to the receptionist, and I was like, I'm so sorry, I have to go. Like, am I still on the schedule? Did I get forgotten about? Like, what's happening here? It was 20 minutes. In the grand scheme of things, that's not that long. Anna waited 83 years and continued to remain faithful and continued her life. My hope for all of us is that in those moments where we feel like we're waiting for God to do something, and it feels like maybe God isn't answering or God isn't there, or God isn't listening, that we remember the story of Anna, who in her time of waiting, she didn't give up. She didn't walk away from God. She didn't just stop believing that God would honor his promise, but she continued to worship and pray and believe that God would honor the promise, never giving up hope. Will you pray with me?